So now we're on Daf Tesamid Beis, and the Gemara immediately asks, Mincha Maya Vidite. How could the Brisa talk about Zrikas Adam in a korban Mincha? Omar Rav Papa says that you know what the Brisa has in mind? It has in mind Minchas Nisachim. Now let's understand. Most karbanos, most zvachim, are accompanied by a mincha called Minchas Nisachim. And that is Nisuch Yain al Gabi Mizbeach, which is an accompaniment to the korban. And now the question is whether or not we can implement this Minchas Nisachim if the Zevach, which the mincha is meant to accompany, does not have basar or chelev. So therefore, what the Brisa wants to tell us is that if all the basar is lost, then you might say, well, you know what? Okay, the basar is lost completely. But nevertheless, the Zrikas Adam will be effective in order to activate the mitzvah of Niskei Minchas Nisachim. So in other words, we would have thought logically that since the purpose of the Minchas Nisachim is to accompany the Zevach, the animal korban, and therefore ki gufei to Zevach Domi, maybe the Minchas Nisachim could replace the meat, the basar for the Achilas Kohen and the chelef for Haktorah, and therefore we can go ahead and be zorik the dam for the purpose of bringing the Minchas Nisachim. So even though the Zrikas Adam in this case will not effectuate a heter for basar or for chelef because those were completely lost, but nevertheless the Zrika can be justified as a mativ for the Minchas Nisachim. Kamash Malon, the Bryce wants to teach us that no, in order to justify the Zrika Saddam, you have to have either meat, basar for Achilas Kohen, or chelef for Achilas Mizbeach. But the fact that there's a mincha, that doesn't help. The mincha per se, if isolated, could not justify the Zrika Saddam. Again, of the korban, which the mincha is coming to accompany. Now, in this case, the Brisa records that Rabbi Yoshua, as long as there's some, it's not over legamri, there's some meat left or chelev left, then we continue with the avoda. And if it's a korban ola, we can even integrate a chatzi zayis of basa with a chatzi zayis of chelev. So in other words, we see here that Rabbi Yochanan has a proof text from this brisa because it seems from this brisa, and again, you know, we're talking about a brisa that's attributed to Rabbi Yoshua. Let's not lose focus on, we learned at the bottom of Amud Aleph, that this brisa, which asserts that if there's something left to the basar and to the chelev, we can justify the zrika. So that's a proof for Rabbi Yochanan that you don't need the total, and if it's chaser, but there's still something left, you could still go ahead and do the avod of zrika, and therefore the same thing should apply in the case of kmitza, by analogy, that if there's something left to the shirayim, then Rabbi Yochanan is right here, as we see in the Brisa, so we can go ahead and do the kmitza. And that's against Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish holds that even if it's chaser, not avud, then there's no kmitza. And here in the Brisa, we see that as far as Rikas Adam is concerned, all we need is something that's left, if there's a kezayis of basar, or kezayis of chelef, or in the case of an ola, chatzi zayis of each, that's enough to justify the zrika. So we go ahead and we do the aktar of the zrika on the mizbeach, and I should say the aktar, I should say zrika on the mizbeach, even though all we're left with is a kezayis basar or a kezayis chel. Umande pasal, is there any way of reconciling this brisa with Reish Lakish? Shiny hacha, here it's different. Now, what does shiny hacha mean? Hacha means Masech the Menachos, so therefore we're referring to a mincha. And Reish Lakish is going to have to prove that in the case of a mincha, it's all or bust. And if you're missing the mincha, even though something is left over, the mincha is completely invalidated. Yom Kra, because the pasuk says at the beginning of Vayikra, in the parsha of mincha, it says Ve'herim hakohen min hamincha es az karasa vehiktir hamizbecha. Now notice that the word mincha has a prefix, and that's the hey, ha mincha. And the Torah is saying that the Kohen will separate this mincha, meaning the komes, which is burnt on the Mizbeach, and it's called azkarasa. That's going to be very important for us, the word azkarasa, but not now. Now what we're focusing on is the hey of hamincha. And the word hamincha, meaning the hey ayidiyah, which is giving significance to the mincha, it's only significance if it's adis l'kula mincha until you have the entire mincha, and if not, lo yaktir, that you don't go ahead and burn the komets on the eish on the mizbeach. In any event, what we're saying is the following: although Rabbi Yoshua clearly from the brisa that we saw would allow you to do zrika and zvachim, even though there's only a kezayis left of the basar or a kezayis left of the chalif, and it's only partial, and then it's chas. Nevertheless, you go ahead and do zrika. But in the case of mincha, by virtue of this drasha, that the Torah explicitly requires that the mincha be, as we said, kula mincha, then and only then can you be maktir the komets, and that's something that even Rabbi Yeshua would agree with idach. What does Rabbi Yochanan do with that pasuk? Min ha-mincha. Take a look. The pasuk says v'herim hakohen min ha-mincha. Min ha-mincha means from the mincha, meaning part of the mincha. Mincha shehoisa kvar shlema, and now it's only min ha-mincha. So originally, when they did the kiddush kli and they sanctified the mincha, it was shlema. Now, before we get to the to the point of kmitza, it's no longer shlema. It doesn't matter because the Torah went ahead and says mina mincha. So that means that if we have a depleted shirayim, nevertheless the komets will be muktar al gabi mizbeach as long as the original kiddush found the mincha to be shlema. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. And now we're going into the laws of lechem hapanim. And again, we have to emphasize that lechem hapanim is a karban mincha, which the shnei bazichen that have the levona in it, those two spoons that are holding on to the levona, they are the equivalent of kmitza, and the shnei bazichen will be matir the lechem. And now we're going to talk about a case where the lechem is chaser. Now, if the lechem is chaser, then the shnei bazichen cannot achieve that goal, which is like parallel to komets, to be matir the achila of the lechem upon it. The 12 loaves will be eaten by the kohen, but only after the shnei bazichen are brought on the mizbeach. So we need the shnei bazichen to be matir. Now, what happens if the lechem is chaser? And look what the brisa tells us. It says, Ad shelo pirka nifras lachma, halechem pasul vein maktir olav es habezichen. But v'im misheperka nifras lachma, halechem pasul maktir olav es habezichen. So Rav Osai, we're going to put the emphasis here on the difference between the reish and the seif as far as haktoras habezichen. Again, haktoras habezichen has the purpose of being matir the lechem. And the Bryce is making the following distinction. It all depends on the pirka. Now let's try to spend a half a second on the word pirka. Pirka means that with regard to the shnei bazichen, we have to, number one, take them off of the shulchan, off of the loaves, and then we have to be maktir them on the mizbeach. So now the Bryce is going to make a distinction, at what point in time was there nifras lachma? Was the loaf made incomplete? And it all depends. And what's in the balance here is whether or not we could be maktir the bazichin. Because again, the purpose of being maktir this bazichin, like the comments in Menachos to be maktir the shirayim, is to be maktir the lechem. Well, can you be maktir the lechem when it's chasera, which is called nifras lachma, and it's not shlema? Says the Brisa, it all depends on exactly at what point in time did the lechem become nifras, meaning did the lechem become incomplete. If it took place before Pirka, is then a lechem possibly ein makter olav es habazichem. Right? And the reason for that is simply that even according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that you can be makter the komets even if the mincha is chasera, but in lechem aponim, if it's disqualified because it's already nifras, then you can't replace the lechem aponim. There's no way of replacing the lechem aponim. And therefore the psul is absolute. And therefore ain't maktir all of us habazichin. If the psul on the lechem is absolute, irreversible, then you can't be maktir this, the bazichin. But im misha pirka, now what does that mean? Pirka, if you take it literally, it means that the shnei bazichin were already taken off of the shulchan. So if that be the case, then you could be maktir the bazichin, even if subsequent to the piruk from the shulchan, the lechem became porous, became incomplete. Now, if the lechem aponim became incomplete after he already removed what he had to remove from the shulchan, and again, that's going to be the kmitza, which is going to ultimately lead to haktara al gabi mizbeach, then against Reish Lakish, we see here clearly that even though the lechem is deficient because it was nifras, nevertheless, maktirin olav es habazichin. So what's Reish Lakish going to do with this brisa that explicitly commits itself that even though the lechem was incomplete and it was porous, but since we've already done the kmitza, which means we've taken the levona off the shulchan, then we could be makter the levona. Why? If the lechem is incomplete, how can we be makter the levona? And this will support Rabbi Yochanan's shita against Reish Lakish, that all you need is that there be something left to the shirayim, which here in this context is the lechem. Now, we could really skip the next couple of lines because this is totally in brackets. This is something that's in the brisa, which Rashi points out. Once they brought the first part of the brisa, they brought the second part of the brisa, but it's not relevant to us. The Omer Rabbi Elazar lo pirka mamish el kemen shehigia zman leporik on Shabbos. They waited till the 7th hour until they took the lechem and the levona off the shulchan. Once we reach that time, afal pishlo pirka, even though he didn't actually remove, the lechem or the bezichin, but nevertheless, it's already considered pirka because he gives man. Okay, that's Rabbi Elazar, and that has nothing to do with us. Amalei Reish Lakish turns to Rabbi Yochanan to try to defend himself. Hamani Rabbi Eliezer. Again, not to confuse it with this Rabbi Elazar about lo higia man. Now, who is Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer is the one, if you haven't forgotten yet, who argues against the Chachamim that in the case of a korban mincha, even if the entire mincha was completely, the shirayim, was completely destroyed, lost, or contaminated, we will still go ahead and be makter the komets. Of course, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that mitzvah of Haktoras HaKometz is not dependent upon its ability to be mat to the Shemaim. So the Shemaim are totally lost. And therefore, says Reish Lakish, if he's the author of this brisa, sorry, Rabbi Yochanan, you have no proof. Because we all agree that according to the Shita Rabbi Eliezer, if the entire mincha was lost, you still are mat to the Kometz. Amalei. Rav Yochanan gets a little bit sensitive here. He says to Reish Lakish, I know I mean Allah Mishnah Shleima v'amrit li at Rabbi Eliezer. I'm quoting to you a Mishnah. You're telling me that Mishnah is attributed to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, my area nifras. Why would Rabbi Eliezer say that if the lechem was partially cut or broken and it's not Shleima, then since that happened after Piruk, you could go ahead and be maktir the bazichin. He should have told me that even if it was totally lost, afilu sarf avud, I don't know why he leaves out Tomei, his machshir. Rabbi Lezer would say that you could be maktir the levona even if the entire, again, the equivalent of shirayim, meaning the entire, what's it called, lechem, when all the lechem was lost. You lost 12 loaves of bread, and yet Rabbi Eliezer would say, go ahead and be maktir the shtei vazich, the levona. Ishtik. Now, on this shtika, which usually means shtika kodah, the Reish Lakish admitted that kasha was a TKO, was a knockout, but nevertheless, the Gemara thinks that Reish Lakish should have given an easy answer. And the Gemara is going to rack its brains to try to figure out why Reish Lakish didn't come up with a defense. The Amai Shasek, Lemalei, he should have responded to Rabbi Yochanan, Tzibur shiny. Holvi Ishtrei Tumalagabayu Ishtrei Nami Chaseros. He could have said the following: you know what? I would even grant you that this brisa is to be attributed to the Chachamim of Rabbi Eliezer. But nevertheless, there's a whole ve'ishtere that applies to lechem aponim, which has no, it's not analogous at all to a regular mincha. Because the lechem aponim is a korban tzibur. All menachos are yachid, right? I have to bring a mincha. I volunteered to bring a mincha. It's all a korban yachid. With regard to a korban tzibur, by contrast, the Torah is very makil, and I'll prove it to you. The ishtrei tumal gabayu. In the case of a korban tzibur, if the tzibur is tamei, which normally would mean that you can't bring the korban, well, it's going to allow you to bring the korban, and that's called tumal hutra b'tzibur. It's therefore ishteri nami chaseros. That's why, even if the lechem is gone, the Torah is makil with regard to the haktorah in the case of the mitzvah of lechem aponim, which is a korban tzibur. So we find this leniency. So now, why didn't Reish Lakish give this answer? You know, the Gemara thinks that we're not more brilliant than Reish Lakish, and the answer is Omer of Adabar Ava. So meres achisaron kibalmum dami v'ein balmum bitzibur. Even the ishtere, the leniency in the case of a korban tzibur bituma, has its limitations. We will never bring a korban tzibur from a balmum. And Reish Lakish is of the opinion that chaser equals a balmum. And therefore, according to Reish Lakish's argument, says Rav Bar Ava, his logic would compel him to equate in this context a korban tzibur, namely lechem aponim, with any classic mincha, which is a korban yachid. There's no difference between tzibur and yachid, because we're talking about chaser. Chaser is a pgam, it's a mum in the mincha. And the same thing should apply to the lechem aponim. If the parus, the lechem was cut, it's a mum. And if it's a mum, then I don't care whether it's a korban yachid or even if it's a korban tzibur, there's no allowance to bring a korban tzibur with a bal mum. Now, the Gemara still is analyzing Reish Lakish's silence. Yosef Rav Papa v'Karmel Leila Hashmaita. Rav Papa was saying over, he was transmitting this whole sugya in front of Rav Yosef Bar Shmaya. And this was the sugya of Rav Ada Bar Ava, who justified the silence of Reish Lakish by saying that in this context, despite the fact that the lechem aponim is a korban tzibur, there's no difference between a korban tzibur and a korban yachid with regard to chasa, because chasa is mum. Amal lei, so Rav Yosef Ashmaya heard this transmission of Rav Ada Bar Ava through Rav Papa, and he says to Rav Papa, Milo askinon de Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish b'minchas ha'omer. Apparently, it was public knowledge, and Rav Yosef knew about this, that the discussion between Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan was in the context of a minchas ha'omer. Now, in addition to lechem aponim, which is a korban tzibur, there's another mincha, which is a minchas tzibur, and that's the omer that's brought on the 16th of Nisan, the tziburu, upligi. Why didn't Reish Lakish give that answer in the context of the omer? And apparently, from the fact that Reish Lakish couldn't have given that answer, he holds that even in the case of a korban tzibur, there's no leniency in the chaser situation. So all this is a support to what we said before, that Reish Lakish didn't have the option of invoking the korban tzibur. Omar Rav Malkio. Right, there are two Amorot that have almost the same name. There's Malkiyo and Malkiyo. This is Malkiyo. Tana Chada. Okay, now this brisa is going to be a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. Until now, we were we were piling on one kasha and the other against Reish Lakish. Misalta. Okay, this is a pasuk in Perek Beis in the context of Menachos. V'hevi'ah El b'nei Aaron hakohen v'kometz misham malo kumta misalta umishamna. Right, salta means fine flour, soles. And in order to be fine, F-I-N-E, it's not enough that it is ground flour, but you also have to complete flour. It's got to be complete. Shem chasra kol shehu psula. Now look at those words, kol shehu. Kol shehu means no matter how much is missing, even the smallest volume is missing, nevertheless it's possible. What do we derive from mishamna, which is the next word in that pasuk? Shem chasra kolshu pasuk. So if you take this brisa and the drushos of misalta, mishamna, you clearly have a problem for Rabbi Yochanan, who says that as long as there's still something left, you can go ahead and do the avoda. Tanya, we have another brisa. Vanoseres min ha-mincha. Right, what does the pasuk say? La'aron ha-kohen ubanov. Right, that's called the shirayim of the mincha. But again, the word is ha-mincha with a hey ayidiyah. So the brisa darshans prat le-mincha shechaserahi. If the mincha is not complete, then forget it. Or another opportunity to again exclude the mincha is shechaser kumta. Let's say that the komets itself became chaser. Part of the komets got lost. Bishalo hiktir milavona klub. Oh, what is this again? Right. If the lavona was lost. Anyway, what's our point is that we see that there are two psukim. One pasuk is misalta, the other is mishalta, and basically they both come to teach us the exact same thing, namely that chasra kolshu is possible. So troy b'chaseros lomali. So why do we need a second drasha to exclude chasera? And the answer must be lav. Lav is with a question mark, like a rhetorical question. Shouldn't we say chad lemincha shechasasa kodem kmitza, v'chad l'shirayim shechasru bein kmitza like Torah? We need two psukim because the easy case is where the mincha became chasera before the kmitza, but now we have a second pasuk to teach us that even if the kmitza was implemented on a shlema, but before the haktorah of the komets, the shirayim became chaser, is nevertheless the mincha's psula. And what does it mean became chaser? It means there's something left. It's not totally gone. That's against Rabbi Yochanan. Utyuvta de Rabbi Yochanan b'travayim. Now the Gemara says that we have a question on two statements and two rulings of Rabbi Yochanan. Right, first of all, Rabbi Yochanan held that if the mincha became chaser, but it wasn't completely lost, then if that happened before the kmitza, all you do is tell the kohen to go back and bring some more flour to replace and replenish that which was lost. And number two, that if the mincha, according to Rabbi Yochanan, became deficient after the kmitza, then you can still be mocked to the kohens. Both of these principles are contradicted by the Brisa. The Gemara says, "Lo, let's defend Rabbi Yochanan." Why do we need two psukim? Chad lemincha shechasra kodem kmitza. And what is the Mishnah telling? What is this Brisa telling us about kodem kmitza? After all, according to Rabbi Yochanan, if it's kodem kmitza, then just replenish it. The answer is the mevi mibeso yimelad in ilo lo. Right? You can't say that there was a kiddush kli on a shlema, and now if it's chaser, we're going to go ahead and do the kmitza. No, you're going to have to go back to your house and bring that volume of flour that's necessary to replenish that which was lost. But again, the Brisa never intended to passel the korban. Chad, why do we need a second drasha? L'shirayim shechasru bein kmitza l'aktorah, the afal gav, the maktir kometz aleim, osan shirayim asur b'achil. You remember there were two dinim. There was one din as far as haktoras ha-kometz or haktoras ha-bazichim, and then there was another din of whether or not you can eat the shirayim. See, if the shirayim are apostle, that's begufo shel shirayim. No matir will allow permission for eating that which is chaser. And that's the chiddush of the second drasha, that if the shirayim became chaser after the kmitza, but before the haktorah, then the shirayim are completely asur. You can't eat the shirayim because the shirayim are chaser. Osan shirayim asur b'achil. Diboilahu. And the Gemara wants to support this by quoting a suffix, L'divrei ha'omer, shirayim shechas v'kvitz l'aktor maktir kometz aleihem. Right, this is Rabbi Yochanan who says that even though the shirayim are chasa, you can still, if that chisaron took place after the kmitza, you could still go ahead and burn the kometz. It's osan shirayim mahen b'achila. What about the deficiency in the shirayim? Can you at least allow, since you're burning the kometz on the mizbech, that the burning of the kometz should be mat to the shirayim, but you only have part of the shirayim, you don't have the complete shirayim. Amar Zeiri says, Amar Kra vehanoseres. Right, this was the second drasha, the second brisa. V'lo hanoseres min hanoseres. Right, what do you have over here? You have shirayim, but then part of the shirayim was lost. So now, if you want to eat the shirayim that wasn't lost, that's already shirayim of shirayim, and that's excluded by the pasuk hanoseres. Noseres means one shirayim, but not two shirayims. Rav Yanei Omar, he disagrees. He says mincha shahaisa kvar. As long as the mincha was sanctified in a klisharis in a state of shlemus, and it was shlemus, then you go ahead and do the kmitza, and you'll burn the komets even if beintayim, after the kmitza was implemented, the shirayim were diminished. Okay, adkan. At this point, I would have said we're finished with today's daf, but we got to finish the daf. So we're going back now to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says that kmitza has to be implemented biyad yamin and not biyad small. And if the Kohen did the kmitza with his left hand, the carbon is possible. How do we know this? Amar Zera, the Amar Kra, Vayakrev es mincha, Vaya, right? This is the parsha of kmitza. Vayamalei kapo mimena. Okay, fine. He does the kmitza and he fills up his palm. So what do we see over here? The word kapo is very incomplete. It's ambiguous. Kaf is any mao. Is this the right hand or the left hand? Kshu omer v'lokacha kohen. And this is, I think, in the parsha of Mitzorah. And it says, v'lokacha kohen milog hashom v'yatzak al kafa kohen hasmalis. So it means that only when the Torah adds the restrictive adjective of smalis, the left one, then the word kaf means the right one. Kan smalis, hakol mokom shenemar kaf eno ela b'yamin. So we see clearly that the kmitza has to take place with the right hand, because kaf means by definition right hand, unless the Torah adds the qualification of left hand. How are you telling me that because it says kaf smolis, we're going to derive any conclusions about the word kaf? I need the word smolis legufe. In other words, what we're talking about is that the lug shemen for the taras hamitzorah has to be placed on the left palm of the kohen. That's part of the necessary mitzvah, the process of taras hamitzorah. So don't start deriving conclusions where the Torah just wants to tell you. So the Gemara answers, smolis achrina have. In other words, the word smolis appears a second time. So we don't need the second one to teach me gufe. Therefore, we use it to teach me what kaf means. You want to exclude the left hand because it's not considered kaf, but maybe the repetition of the word smolis is a ribui, because we have a principle that mir achar mir is the rabos. The Gemara answers smolis achrina. We have a third time that it says smolis. Actually, in the notes here, he goes through all the psukim. Okay, this is in Perek Yudalid of Vayikra. You have to see from Pasuk Tezayin all the way to Pasuk Chavav, which we don't have time to do that now because we're already over time. But in any event, let's just finish up. And the Gemara says that we have another smolis. V'yema adarabba ma kan smolis af bi'almanami smolis. Why do you assume that smolis is a miut? Maybe smolis is a gili milsa to tell you that whenever it says kaf, it's kaf smolis. The Torah has to tell me that one time, and after that one time, I can extrapolate for all other times. And the Gemara says arba smolis ksive trei bi'ani utrei bi'oshi. So if you go through the parsha of Mitzorah and the process of Mitzorah, and what karbanos he has to bring for Tara depends upon Olavi Yored, which means whether he's wealthy or whether he's poor. So therefore, we come to the conclusion that whenever it says the word kaf, it's a left kaf only if the Torah explicitly says left kaf. So we'll finish here with Omar Le Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera al boen yodo hayimonis al boen ragla hayimonis lamali. In other words, why does the Torah repeat al boen yodo twice, and each time it says the word yimonis? And that's the drasha that we have here on the next Amud. Chad lahachshit stadim and chad lifsol tzidei stadim. So that will pick up Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Tomorrow we're back to noon. Am I correct? Okay, great. Have a great day.